I'm a Southern California boy, mostly. After I moved to the States in my teen years, this is where I made home. This episode is being filmed on January 11th, 2025. And as I film this, the fires in LA area bringing absolutely devastating damage and destruction to so many lives here. Talking about a bike seems very trivial, but the fires actually also impact a lot of us that have the same common interest. I don't want to sound insensitive talking about, something like a bike while people are losing homes and livelihoods and such. At the same time, the fires definitely do impact us here, bike riders in LA. A lot of the roads that I could be found riding with my homies are either damaged or will not be available for a very long time. PCH, Topanga Canyon, Tujunga, Mulholland, Mount Wilson, GMR, Montrose Ride routes, LaGrange Ride routes. So many, Stunt, Fernwood, could go on and on, but all these roads are impacted by the raging fires, and basically, those of us in LA, we have lost our stomping ground, playing ground. So this definitely does impact us. And even within the community, there has been a loss. I believe Sunday's bicycle shop, I believe the owner, his home has been lost in the fire. I don't know the person personally, but I remember seeing something coming across the feed. Talking about a bike seems so trivial and small in the scale of life and disaster and such. But I just wanted to take this platform and wish all of you especially in the LA area, I hope all of you are okay, that your family's okay, and hopefully everybody will recover and we will see each other out on the road together again. Let's get on to the episode. What do Matthew Vanderpool, Jasper Philipsen, Annemiek van Vleuten, and Kasia Niewiadoma and I have in common? Well, let's look. They ride professionally and they win prestigious races. I cannot beat my fat friend to the donut shop. They can drop 1,300 watt bombs at will when needed. I hurt my back trying to blow a snot rocket riding Zone 2. They can probably do 300 watts in Zone 1 in recovery, where if I can hold 300 watts for 10 minutes, I would chalk that up as a win. So what do we all have in common? Absolutely nothing other than the bike that's underneath. There's plenty to talk about. There are some things that I don't particularly care for about this bike. What the F am I doing with a pro level bike? Grab some coffee. Sit down, hold on, let's go. Roll the intro. Hello everyone, how are you? This is yours truly, Diabetic Cycling, coming at you once again. As you can see, I am wearing my new merch. I made some shirts and hoodies for you all. Those of you interested in supporting the channel. Down to ride, got bikes, will travel, I'll ride anytime, I'll ride anywhere. It's my ethos, and if you share that type of a passion for cycling, maybe this is something you would like to rock. Anyhow, so that said, this channel is sponsored by my own damn wallet, but brought to you by your engagement. So please hit the like button, drop any comment or ask me any questions, and mostly hit that subscribe button so I can come see you more often. There are a lot of interesting episodes that I am working on, as I will list right here. I never raced professionally. I've never worked at a bike shop. I never owned any bike magazine business. The goal of this channel is for me to be as upfront with you as possible and transparent with you as possible, where nothing is held back. Over the last dozen years or so, I've had the privilege and pleasure to own and ride crap ton of miles on the bikes that I will list right here. So I will not stand here and tell you my thoughts and opinions are factual by any stretch of imagination. The bike reviews cannot be quantifiable. What's stiff to you may not be stiff to me, vice versa. So thoughts and opinions shared in this episode purely based on baseline established by all the bikes that I've had owned in the past and ridden and still currently riding. So take my sayings for what they are worth. I'm sure everyone watching this episode is familiar with the Canyon, so I won't spend too much time on them. It's a German brand that's been around for decades. They basically the de facto standard in direct-to-rider, direct-to-consumer type of business model, doing away with the traditional brick-and-mortar storefront dealership. As expected, they are a very popular choice for those seeking value, as the middleman has been cut out from the equation. Therefore, they can pass on lower price point, lower price tag to us, the riders, directly. Their road bike offerings predominantly consist of three bikes. You have the Endurace, which would be a more endurance purpose bike with the relaxed geometry. Then they have the Ultimate. Ultimate previously reviewed, which I'll link right here, happens to be one of my top 3 all-time favorite bikes. And then they have the Aeroad, which is their all-aero offering. And then the Aeroad comes in 3 different trim levels consisting of a variety of different component levels. So at the entry level, you have the SL. Middle of the road enthusiast level would be your CF SLX. And at the very top of the food chain, the big dog, would be the CFR Canyon Factory Racing trim, which is being reviewed in this episode. This is the make no apology, go win every race, all out race bike, race trim that Canyon puts out. Minus the wheels, I believe this is the exact same configuration that your favorite riders, Alpecin de Koenig and Movistar, ride. Despite being an aero bike with chunky sections and stiff carbon layup, the bike barely tips over 15 pounds. Even just maybe 5 years ago, that would have been almost unthinkable for an aero bike to weigh so little. Along those lines, aero bikes have this reputation that they are very harsh to ride. So how does this bike ride? Stay tuned, we'll talk about it. I don't know if this is the nicest bike I've ever ridden, but it is definitely the most expensive bike that I've bought at $10,000 price tag that it comes with. And that's way too expensive at an enthusiast level. classified as a super bike at this point with that kind of a price tag. I would say this is a bike meant for pro riders that are being sponsored, or those of you that take racing seriously. Those of us not racing professionally, I don't know why we would drop that kind of coin on a super bike, $10,000, $15,000, whatever. However, is there something on this bike that makes it worthwhile to remortgage the house? We will continue to discuss. So mine is Canyon's extra small in sizing. Now Canyon does run larger, so this bike at extra small, it's equivalent of other companies' small and or 51 to 52 centimeters in geometry size. So bike is predominantly black with some kind of a hologram-esque silver-ish shiny logo on the down tube saying Canyon with the freckles underneath the top coat that really make the bike pop, especially when the sun hits. In terms of a drivetrain, it is a Shimano Dura Ace, a 12-speed Di2 all over the bike. Now, as shared many times on this channel, I'm a big fan of a Shimano 105 Di2 as well as Ultegra Di2. I believe Dura Ace is a bit of an overkill for those of us that are not racing professionally, just at an enthusiast level or weekend warrior, because the weight saving through Dura Ace is very minimal when considering how much more expensive it is. You're spending a lot more whilst gaining not very much. And then, like I mentioned in my unboxing video, I probably wouldn't have gotten this bike in this configuration at this price range if I didn't have this YouTube channel, but I decided to splurge and get this bike in this trim level to establish in the future episodes when things are being compared against the Dura Ace, just so that I have something that's tangible that I can measure against. Continuing on with the build, my crankset out of the factory spec is 5234 semi-compact with 1130 in the back. Typically, I prefer my bikes to be equipped with the 5034 at the front, completely compact, and then cassette 1134 being my preference. So what I did with this bike, I did change the cassette to 1134 just so that I have a chance of getting over a mountain with my weak legs. However, you could completely see why Canyon would have spec'd the bike with the semi-compact up front and 1130 in the back, as you would need that sort of a tight gearing for just dumping power on flat roads when you are racing your buddies to the next stop sign. I basically didn't need the 1130 because I'm not racing against Caleb or Fabio Jakobsen. So the wheels that come stock with the bike out of the Canyon factory are DT Swiss Arc 1150 mil front and rear. Now I thought I saw somewhere Canyon now partners with the Scope wheels, so I don't know if the newer ones come with the Scope wheels. Anyhow, I believe the SRAM offering, if you buy the SRAM Access groups and not Shimano, I believe then they give you the Zip wheels. Anyhow, that said, more on the wheels later. The rotors are 160 mil up front and 140 mil in the rear. Completely fine with my body weight and everything else. However, all my other bikes, I configure them 160 front, 160 rear. That way I could always swap the rotors back and forth, the wheels back and forth from different bikes and such. So this bike actually has not had different wheel treatment just yet. It's been ridden with just the stock wheels up to this point. Out of the factory, the bike comes with the Continental GP5000, which I removed immediately with the 0 miles ridden and replaced with different tires that I prefer. With the size extra small by Canyon, again, equivalent to small by others, the bike comes with a cockpit that is 90 mil stem and their pace system, which you can adjust the width of the bar. Now, I did get the optional aero drops that Canyon puts out, which I could go as narrow as, what was it, 35 or 37 centimeter wide. And the flare at the drops would be equivalent to right about 40, I want to say. And the air drops do provide additional 10 millimeters in reach. And then the stock saddle that the bike comes with would be Selle Italia Superflow Boost in 3D. The saddle is only 130 mil wide though, bucking the trend of going wider and shorter. I personally prefer the exact same saddle, but at 145 mil. However, on that note, this is my first 3D printed saddle, which I'll talk a little bit more later on. And then where I think Canyon really did it right is selling the bike without a long ass steer tube that's left that you need to cut. The bike comes with the 2 centimeters up and down give without having to cut the steer tube, which is great because cutting the steer tube usually involves redoing the hydraulic braking system and all that. It's very cumbersome. So and also at the same time, those of you buying an aero bike as aggressive as this wouldn't be running 5 centimeters in spacers anyways. And then if you need the 5 centimeters of spacers, then this is not the bike for you. So I praise Canyon for not selling the bike with a ton of steer tube left that creates a chimney, or putting the bike rider at a geometry as so. So you can take one look at this bike and easily come away with a conclusion that this is an out and out aero bike. So the fork frontal, when you're looking at the fork from the front, very svelte, very narrow. The C-stays have a wide profile when looking at from the side for all important airflow turbulence management. The seat post, proprietary seat post, very, very narrow looking at it from the front, and obviously has a bit wider profile, though not as wide as some of the other aero seat posts. And then something like the down tube, complete camtail truncated foil treatment to aid the bike slice through the air. Just overall, as a system, as a whole bike, the frontal profile is very, very compact, very, very fast, just when looking at it. That said, you also don't see any overly exaggerated bits on the design to make it aero. There are no there isn't any overly cooked marketing things or the gimmicks. For instance, even compared to my own aero bikes, other aero bikes, for instance, like a Ribble Ultra SLR has some bits on its design and build that make it maybe overly exaggerated, depending on who you ask. Madone, the previous gen now, Madone has that butthole ISOFlow hole that make it supposedly for air turbulence and more aero, blah, blah, blah. So it is devoid of things as such to make it all this all more aero than it already is. One can argue Canyon may not have taken advantage of the relaxed UCI rules that now govern all that ratio, like a 3-to-1 in terms of the depth and the length and how the tubes need to look. Those rules have been relaxed. So you could have gone even more extreme in terms of design, but the bike looks the way it does, which again, plenty aero, perhaps not as aero as one can argue. Featuring everything a modern bike should have, the bike looks somewhat understated in terms of being fancy aero bike, and I may feel this way only because this is now their 4th generation Aeroad, and through the generations, I don't think the changes have been that drastic, perhaps on purpose, especially compared to the last generation. There isn't really a whole heck of a lot different in terms of appearance anyways. They've made changes to the seat post clamp and some of the other minor bits, but for all intents and purposes, overall aesthetics really didn't change. I also do appreciate, however, that you could just run normal water bottles. You don't need some proprietary water bottles that only fit with some proprietary the bottle cages, because the cages and the bottles were part of the aero design that work with the down tube, and now you can only use a certain bottles. So I appreciate that you could just run normal bottles. I'm not the biggest fan of a black bike, however, being completely black with that glossy coat and you got that metallic flake underneath, making it look like space galaxy type of a look, I don't mind it at all. Matter of fact, I really dig the appearance. So first and foremost, I want to say this before I go any more deeper into the ride characteristics of the bike and such. At the enthusiast to non-pro level, I don't know really having an aero bike is all that beneficial. Yes, you could definitely feel the difference once you get the bike up to 22 miles and above. Right around there is where I start seeing a bit of a difference. But unless you are a pro rider doing 500 watts at 40 miles an hour, really that difference is negligible, especially if you're not racing. So, you know, I mean, you ride what floats your boat. So it's a free country, so that's fine. I'm just saying, just getting on the aero bike doesn't magically make some normal rider faster by 25% or anything. So I do want to make that disclaimer. And let's not mess around. The day a $10,000 bike does not ride well, the entire industry would be in trouble. And as expected, so the bike does ride very well. And Canyon and any other company would put in a ton of R&D into their designs and engineering. And this 4th generation Aero that Canyon puts out, a lot of work obviously went in with the feedback of the pro riders and everything else. Bike does ride very well. However, is there a definitive characteristic that makes this bike stand out from the crowd? With employing the Aero drop handlebar attachments that Canyon puts out, I am very narrow at the front end. However, I do wish that it's a little longer in the reach, because I'm still running the Canyon Pace base setup that came with a 90 mil stem. I could probably use maybe a centimeter or two if I really want to dial in the fit. And eventually, I think I will end up going that route. But again, that's going to involve redoing the hydraulics. So I'm not like chomping at the bit to get that done. But eventually that is going to happen to make my fit a little bit more natural. Right now, even the Aero drops do provide another 10 millimeter of a reach compared to their standard drops. So there is a bit of give there. But at times I may feel that I'm a little bit cramped, but also at the same time, compared to my other bikes, which I run similar stack and reach numbers, it's not like my knees are hitting the handlebar when I'm riding out of the saddle, anything like that. So far, I have not really come across a situation where the fit is completely off. Now, if I went up in size for this Aero going with their small, which should be other companies' medium, I did see the the stack would be a little bit too much, where the reach might have been okay. So that is something that is going to come at some point by extending the reach, for me anyways. So I'm not gonna stand here and tell you that this bike is as comfortable as their own Ultimate or some kind of a gravel rig. However, gone are the stereotypes of aero bike equal harsh. Out on like long days on the saddle, I've never come home feeling like the bike really beat me up. And that is really a lot to say, considering this is an all-out aero bike that is so damn stiff. Obviously, overall system contributes to the compliance of the ride. Like the seat post, it's narrow, it has a wider side profile, but does a much better job neutralizing any sort of unwanted vibration coming up through my ass and then spine and everything else with the jolt. Does much more admirable job than, for instance, like that of Canyon Super 6 Evo that I reviewed here. The seat post on that bike really doesn't do very good job in terms of neutralizing the road vibration. And as mentioned earlier, the saddle, I probably would have preferred the wider offering that SL Italia makes. But right now, I'm not unhappy with the 3D SL Italia Superflow Boost saddle that the bike came with as a stock offering. The bike feels tight and well composed to summarize, with no flabbiness underneath. And as an aero bike, obviously you would expect it to be stiff. It might be stiffer than it needs to be in some sections, but it is doing a great job without delivering harsh characteristics that yesteryear's aero bikes are synonymous with. So many things contribute to, when you talk about how a bike handles and how well does it handle, how is the handling. I pay close attention. Maybe it's because I used to ride rice rockets, crotch rockets, whatever you call it. So I pay a lot of attention to the front end. On a road bike as such, the fork rake and overall geometry and a lot of that contribute to how a bike would handle. And I especially pay attention to cornering. If I need the bike to go where I am looking and hold that line as I'm making a graceful turn, exit out of a turn, going into a turn, especially becomes more important if that corner comes up on a fast, high-speed descent. And I don't know what I was expecting or not expecting, but this bike clearly has a fantastic handling characteristics, especially talking about the things that I pay attention to. The cornering, razor sharp, holds that line impeccably. And I am not afraid of throwing the bike around, knee on the ground like the MotoGP race guys. Not an issue on high-speed descent. I can ride with confidence. And speaking of confidence, bike feels completely balanced. Unlike the Canyon Super 6 Evo, which I mentioned, one of the big drawbacks on that bike was that the balance was off. The bike rode a little funny and felt the top heavy, whereas the Aeroad feels completely well balanced, as one would expect at this price point. I feel like some of my other bikes may be faster off the gun. This may or may not have to do with the wheels the Aeroad is currently riding on, the DT Swiss Arc 1100. I have not had a chance to swap the wheels to see if that's the difference, because the frame set itself is clearly very, very stiff. It is not any less stiffer than my other bikes that I'm comparing to. But right out of the gun, when the red light turns green, trying to get the forward momentum going, it is just ever so, it feels to me just so ever so, I don't want to use the word sluggish, but you know what I'm trying to say. It is not as quick, and I think it might be the wheels. So I'll come back to you on that in future episodes when I talk about wheels. And then whether you are a pro rider or a weekend warrior, you're not going to ride just on flat roads unless you live in, what's the state here in the States? United States, that is just nothing but flat. Is it like Iowa or Idaho? I don't know. But there is a state where it's just dead flat. So unless you live there, you are going to have to climb some things. So with that said, I mean, this bike being barely over, like a couple grams over 15 pounds as it's built. And when I say the weight, I mean ride ready. So that's with the pedals, the computer mount, the bottle cages on, and all that. So with that weight, I mean, yes, the weight weenie people will argue that, hey, unless it's below 12 pounds, you can't call it light. Mind you, the UCI limit is, what was it, 14.9 pounds? So it's just a hair over 15, and it's plenty light enough. And that's where it, the bike also catches you by surprise because how well it handles, because it's light and it's stiff. So when you're climbing, especially out of the saddle, you do not feel like you are being compromised by riding an aero bike. And also until about like 6% gradient, right at about 4 to 5% gradient, you still have some advantage of riding on an aero bike. Although again, at an enthusiast level, at the speed that we are riding, it may not be that noticeable. But the bike does plenty great on climbs. Again, the 5236 semi-compact up front and 1130 in the back as the bike comes a spec, that may not be climbing friendly, but that depends on your level as a climber, as well as if it matters that much, you could also get those changed. Okay, so this next point is maybe controversial to some of you. To me, this bike, despite the branding of it being an aero bike, to me, this bike is more or less an all-arounder than a all-out aero bike. I think it competes more so against likes of Specialized Tarmac, Factor Ostro, and Pinarello Dogmas. You know, those are all-arounder bikes. They're not necessarily the light bike. They're not necessarily the aero bike. It's the one bike that does everything. I think the Canyon Aeroad more or less leans towards that than being just a straight up, no compromise aero bike. For instance, it leans more towards the all-arounder than like my Ribble Ultra SLR or the previous gen Madone, which both are completely all-out aero bikes. So maybe this is a conscious decision by Canyon. Now, I don't think Canyon will ever ditch Ultimate and Aeroad and come up with some one bike for all type of a situation. But I cannot help but to think this Aeroad bike leans more towards being an all-arounder. But who knows? I mean, even Trek themselves, they have now combined the Madone and the Monda into the new Gen 8 Madone that is somewhat aero and somewhat light, one bike that does everything. So, you know, I believe Aeroad is leaning a little bit towards that direction. And that's just my personal opinion. And another controversial point, perhaps, the ride quality is as good as dialed in as it is. I really walked away with a similar impression as I did with Specialized Tarmac of mine. I feel the bike is really homogenized. Is that a proper way to put it? So Canyon, being in the business of selling bikes, they need to put out bikes that appeal to the mass, to more people. you can't put out something that only appeals to a small niche, because then you are really narrowing your target audience. So they really need to come up with the design and the, whatever that is not offensive to certain sector of the consumers and the bike shopping crowd. And to me, the bike rides really well. It's very good, but also at the same time, there's nothing that really sticks out where that defines this bike as its own, has its own unique personality. So the ride characteristics to me are very similar compared against like the Tarmacs and the Austrovams of the world. This may be an insane way to put it, and you should never do it. But say you close your eyes and you ride a Specialized Tarmac, close your eyes, ride the Austro, close your eyes and ride the Aeroad. I don't know if the differences would be significant enough for you to be able to distinguish which bike you are riding. So in other words, it's a great riding bike, a great racing tool, just perhaps not enough personality of its own to stand out from the crowd. Okay, obviously I need to start with the way Canyon specs different size components. The biggest drawback buying a bike from Canyon is that you don't have an opportunity to really specify different components in terms of your fit. You can't dictate longer stem, shorter stem, wider bar, narrower bar, shorter crank length. You can't do any of that. All that needs to be done after the thought. Meaning that's additional money, additional time spent at the bike shop, or you could do it yourself, but same. It's money and time that's unnecessarily being spent. Of course, from their perspective, they need to do that so that they can buy in bulk the same size instead of so many of this, so many of that. Instead, what they're doing is they're just buying one size of this much, therefore pass on their savings, whatever. And that obviously does not bode well buying a bike right out of the gate that has a great fit, since you cannot specify. And then couple that with the extreme difficulties trying to order replacement parts. I mean, if you've shopped the Canyon, buying replacement parts is very difficult. Either they don't have in stock, or two, they make you go through hoops to even trying to get a part for your own bike. Like for instance, years ago when I bought Ultimate, I didn't like the size of my integrated bar. I offered, look, I'm not trying to sell the bar. I just want you to sell me a new bar, and I'll send you this bar. Or I try to reason with them, trying to get a bar that fits me better, but they wouldn't sell me the bar separately. So that was a big deal at that time. But even today, I mean, one, they don't have things in stock. Two, you try to order something, they would make you take a photo of your serial number, take a photo of your bike from the side, and this and that, send it to us. And then once they validate that you do own a bike, that this part would fit, their reasoning that they'll tell you is that, oh, we want to ensure what you're buying will fit your bike. Well, I'm sure that is reasonably true to a certain point, but it's just not a straight up process like buying a bike part from your local dealer or even from an online dealer. I mean, when I bought my Factor Austro or when I bought my Ribble Ultra SLR, those were direct to consumer buy at the time. And I had a chance to spec out every little single thing right down to different millimeters, and that type of customization is not available. And then, I personally never had this situation happen to me, but I've heard other people mention how, they take their Canyons into local bike shops for service and repair, what have you. And then they get the stink eye treatment because, it's a bike that was not purchased through that particular shop. Now, personally, I don't know why bike shop would even give that kind of attitude towards the incoming customers, because that's still revenue in labor work that you are providing despite the bike was not bought there. So I don't know what the big deal is, but apparently there are some shops that don't really care for you bringing in Canyon bikes for service. And next point really chaps me too. If a bike company runs a proprietary mount, proprietary bar, I feel they really need to give you a computer mount that goes with their proprietary design. You can't just make it so that generic parts don't fit and then charge you for a computer mount. So for instance, the Canyon Aeroad, I had to buy the dumb snap-on computer mount that they sell so that it goes onto the integrated handlebar. It's just a money grab, basically, if you ask me. If you're gonna make it so that regular mounts don't fit, then you should really not screw the customer and provide a mount for free. The next point, it wasn't necessarily Canyon's fault, depending on how you look at it, but the Dura Ace power meter that's on the crankset was not reading accurately anywhere near where the numbers should have been. I mean, I'm doing like all out effort and it's reading like 19 watts. That's after calibration and zero offset, blah, 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 blah. So quickly I did the firmware update, and after that, it then started to read numbers correctly. Not a big deal, but annoying nonetheless. Next point is really extremely personal and along the lines of what I said in reviewing my Tarmac SL8. To me, the bike tries hard not to offend anybody. Like I said earlier, it borders on being an all-arounder than a true all-out aero bike. It really is neutralized in terms of wanting to be a full-out aero, and sort of blurs the line, if you ask me. So instead of providing with a unique personality a bike could be identified by, it's more or less kind of blends in the looks and how it rides, trying to be this all-arounder that is not offensive to any sector of cyclists. Okay, so the next section is the would I rather. And then to save time, I'm not gonna match the Aeroad up against some of the bikes that I've shown on the channel that are not quite apple to an apple. So you may not see all the bikes that I've shown you so far, and comparing only to those that I feel is relevant. So the first up is, would I rather ride an Austrovan or the Aeroad? Here I am gonna pick the Aeroad. It is not to say Austrovan is a terrible bike. It's a great bike. I just feel like when you spec them equally, the price is slightly lower on the Aeroad, and I just feel like Austrovan, while it's a fantastic bike, it is slightly overpriced. So that's how I would make my pick there. Second bike up would be the Pinarello Prince of Mine versus Aeroad. Which one would I prefer? I'll tell you to you this way. The Pinarello Prince, it's not a dogma, but it definitely has its own personality. It has the Italian flair. It is not the lightest bike in the world by any stretch of imagination, but there's something about that bike which I don't have when I'm riding my Tarmac or my Aeroad. So I'll put it to you this way. If you need a bike to go race on, I would take the Aeroad. For any other, if you're just an enthusiast level a rider that don't need to race or anything, Not to say the Prince suffers in stiffness or any sort of aero appointments, because it does have plenty of those. I would take the Pinarello if racing isn't as important to you, because it is slightly heavier than the Aeroad. So that's how I would do my pick there. Third bike up is a Cervelo Soloist against Canyon Aeroad CFR. Now, this may look a little different if I compare the Aeroad CFSLX, their next level down, not the CFR that costs $10,000. So I would, in this, and whereas a Cervelo Soloist does not come in different frame grade, it's just one frame set. So comparing against a Cervelo Soloist, which one would I take? I would probably take the Soloist over the Aeroad, because the Soloist really does a great job. It is at home regardless of what's in front, what type of terrain, what type of road, what type of gradient. It just excels everywhere without costing you an arm and a leg. It's just, as an overall package, I feel that it's a superior package than the Aeroad, despite me continually saying how the Aeroad is more or less an all-arounder than all-out aero. I would pick the Cervelo Soloist and save a few bucks over my Aeroad CFR, if you ask me. Against my Ribble Ultra SLR, which one would I pick? Because it's an aero versus aero, right? Well, you're gonna have to wait until my 3-bike battle episode comes up shortly. So I'm gonna put out an episode basically pitting 3 of my aero bikes against each other. That's the Ribble Ultra SLR, Canyon Aeroad, and the Madone Gen 7. Specialized Tarmac SL8 versus Canyon Aeroad CFR. Again, my Tarmac is their enthusiast level one. It's not S-Works, whereas the Aeroad is the CFR trim, which is the top of the line offering. So you may say it's not quite apple to an apple, but they are both race-oriented bikes. They're both light, they're both aero reasonably. So on that note, if I have to pick out of the two, I would probably take the Aeroad, because even though the ride characteristics are so similar, I feel a little bit more lively. The livelier feedback exists on the Aeroad. Aeroad doesn't feel as deadened as the Tarmac SL8. Against the Cannondale Super 6 Evo, you probably know if you've been watching my channel, I am not a big fan of that Cannondale Super 6 Evo, the current gen. I would have to go with my Aeroad CFR. Canyon Ultimate versus Canyon Aeroad. I know the Canyon Ultimate intimately. I've ridden bazillion miles on my own Ultimate, and Aeroad, which I got earlier last year. This is going to be a tricky pick. There is no clear winner here, because you could go either way and not suffer from your decision consequences. Aeroad is obviously also their race bike. It is lighter, has aero bits on it. So here, instead of making a one definitive pick, I would just tell you, if you live in mountainous area or your riding terrain consists of flat roads as well as hills and climbs, take the Ultimate. If you live in cornfield, if you live in a state that's got nothing but the cornfield and everything is just dead ass flat, take the Aeroad. Either way, can't go wrong. And then finally, against the Trek Madone SL, the Gen 7. Again, aero bike versus aero bike. I would make that pick when, again, on the aforementioned that 3-way battle episode that I'm gonna put out. To conclude, let me start off with this. This is literally a perfect bike for Canyon to sell to the consumers. But because it almost offends no one and caters to everybody. But is it a perfect bike for you? While I have my own opinions, you may have completely different opinion, and trust me, 10,000 bike is a dream bike to me as well. And maybe you look at Aeroad and you get tingly feelings inside you, and this may be your dream bike. So take what I say with grain of salt. I don't want to sound like a chauvinist, and my analogy here is not meant to degrade women or any of that. I got to be really careful with saying things in the woke culture that we live in. But I'm just going to give you an analogy to help understanding easy. If you look at Angelina Jolie, Ana de Armas, Sydney Sweeney, Margot Robbie, these are all beautiful actresses with various level of acting chops. Depending on your personal preference, one may look more appealing to you than others, just as Aeroad may appeal to you more than another bike, and vice versa. Now, when you look at Angelina Jolie, equally beautiful in terms of a beauty standard, but doesn't she bring certain different characteristics in terms of a beauty standard? She has a slightly different, unique aura about her, and maybe you say the same about Sydney Sweeney or another. What I'm trying to get at is we all have different values, different opinions, what make our boats float. So on that note, to me, Aeroad does not provide me with that unique, different personality. For instance, what Angelina Jolie has that makes her stand out from the others. Does not mean I don't love the other actresses and appreciate their beauty any less, but there's something unique about a person. There's something that's unique about a bike. I don't know if I'm necessarily really finding that uniqueness on this Aeroad. Isn't giving you something that's not found on others. At the same time, it is ticking every box you need for a bike to have and be able to do. Make no mistake about it, this is a fantastic bike with or without a comparison to another bike. And then on top of all that, I feel like it's an attainable super bike because equally equipped bike by Pinarello, Specialized S-Works, and Scott, and among others, you're gonna see that price tag come in at $15,000, whereas this build, perhaps because of the direct-to-consumer model, you could get it for 10 grand. While 10 grand is not small money by any imagination, it is more attainable than something that costs 50% more. If you're one that wishes to be a just one bike guy, suffering from no compromises, superb razor-like handling, this is a bike for you. Perhaps not emotionally invoking, but as a race tool, this is a fantastic bike, a tool that you cannot go wrong with this particular rig. Okay, that's it for this episode. I thank you if you stayed around this long. I do have a bunch of other episodes coming up, so please don't forget to subscribe. And for those of you that are able to ride out there, be safe out on the roads, be good humans. You've been awesome. I've been Diabetic Cycling. Until next time, I'm out.